Welcome to Cordkillers, the full experience, where we watch the first, the ultimate, the lowest rated, and the last episode of a series to get a slice of what that series is about. We are watching Sliders, and this week we are watching the ultimate episode, the highest rated episode according to IMDb, Season 2, Episode 8, Post-Traumatic Slide Syndrome. I'm Tom Merritt. He's Brian Brushwood.
Hey, man. So this was really a fun one for me because my 20-year-old daughter had never seen Sliders. You and I have acknowledged that Sliders had a lot of proto ideas that would later show up in everything from Rick and Morty to the MCU, et cetera, et cetera. And I basically said to her, hey, your dad does this thing with Tom Merritt called The Full Experience, and we're about to watch the ultimate, the highest rated episode of this show. And I vaguely described Sliders, and I described it as kid genius, father figure, jerk, scientist, will they, won't they, girlfriend, and a Motown hero.
Rembrandt's the everyman. I usually refer to him as the everyman, right? Like,
but what a peculiar everyman he is, though.
Yeah, yeah. Because how many every person characters are like incredibly successful Motown singers? So yeah, no.
Known as the crying man, and as we see in this episode, specifically obsessed with the fact that he's the only one who gets to cry.
Okay, I don't want to. I'm going to jump to something, even though we haven't talked about anything else in the episode. But it struck me that Rembrandt's ability to tell that they weren't in the actual original universe they came from was that he wasn't able to bilk his co-bandmates out of their credit on writing the song.
Because they had credit, because in
How
his
dare like
universe,
you would not write it that way today if you were writing that today. It was hilarious to me.
I disagree. Like for some of us,
if you want to make Rembrandt look bad, you write it that way. But in the modern sensitivities that are out there, writers would not make that a point of a sympathetic character, like, they wanted credit for my song, so I knew this was the bad. That turns him to a villain for most people these days.
Oh, no. I actually read that as like, as an entertainer, you tend to pay very close attention to the contracts that you sign. And he, I would assume, in his lived reality, paid very close attention about who owned what. And this is coming from somebody who is speaking possibly from personal experience, who paid very close attention to some contracts that mattered a lot 10 years later. That's what that felt like to me, is that
most people are not entertainers. And if you're in a writer's room in 2024 and you're like, so I figured Rembrandt would notice because he would be mad that the other members of the band got credit. The rest of the writer's room is like, no, the people will turn on us. Do not do that.
That's today I learned, Tom.
Because I totally get where you're coming from. Like it's and I think that's how it played back then. Right? Like when this episode aired in the 90s in March 22nd. Wait, no, that's the pilot. I didn't get the date for this one, but this was 96 at some point. Yeah.
But the important thing is that everybody had their own touchstone for what finally broke them. So for Quinn, it was immediate. It was tiny details about sports, and
he knows the Super Bowls, and we all know people like that if we're not those people ourselves. And so I identified with that. I was like, oh yeah, nobody else cares, but he cares, and so he knows.
Separately, Rembrandt, he definitely knows, but keeps his mouth quiet, which, by the way, they also do a very clever thing of like, Rembrandt is the narrator of the story, and you think it's in the same universe, but instead he's just they know they're sliding from place to place.
That was a 3-part fake out, right? Because at first you think, oh, he's in another reality again, and they think he's crazy. Then it became, oh no, they're back in their home reality, and he's just getting therapy. And then it became, oh no, he's in another reality, and they think he's crazy.
He's just like, yeah, no, I just wanted to unload some trauma on you. Bye, have a good one.
Yeah.
And then meanwhile, now of course, there's a special case for Arturus.
Professor Arturo.
Set that one aside. But Wade is the one who wants deepest to deny the possibility that they're not in the right place, because she's having so much go right for her. And then finally it takes, I don't know, the Golden Gate Bridge being the Azure Gate Bridge.
It's probably the only part of this episode that I didn't like, because I was waiting for the thing, right? The thing that would be so different. And usually Sliders is very good at a plausible thing that's different. But I was like, explain to me why the Golden Gate Bridge would be called the Azure Gate Bridge. Like, it'd just be the Azure Bridge if it was blue, and they painted it blue because it's the ocean or something. The Golden Gate was the gateway to the gold rush. That is a tiny picky detail, but it's one Sliders is actually usually pretty good with. So it was the only part that made me go, oh, they skimped a little on that one, but all right, fine.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah.
Between the two of us, which of the two of us owned real estate and lived in San Francisco?
Well, I did. No, wait, no, I didn't. I only owned real estate in Oakland, never in San Francisco.
Right. You get my point. my point is, maybe it mattered a little bit more to you than to me.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I wouldn't argue that for a second. My point was, that's how good this episode was. That is the biggest thing I can pick on.
It's a good episode. It's such a good episode, and so ahead of its time that, what is it? I don't know, 7 years before my daughter was conceived. I watched it, and my daughter watched it with me, and she said at around the 37-minute point, she was like, oh, wait, it's not actually their world. Only he gets it. Eventually everyone else gets it. That guy is secretly a bad guy. And did
she guess that there were 2 Arturos? Did she go that far? Yeah.
She guessed literally every single thing. And very rarely, normally when my daughter predicts things and she's right, I'm like, well, let's see. But she got so many things right that I was just like, you're released for the day.
Well, and there's been a lot, that's always the problem with watching older stuff, is tropes are built on previous episodes, and that the trope thickness is not as thick around this kind of episode as it is now, right? So she's been exposed to more tropes that reference these same tropes. And I didn't remember this episode very well. I know I saw it, but I didn't remember it. So I don't know if I was remembering or predicting. I'm not going to give myself too much credit, but I immediately was like, that's not their Arturo. I felt like that should be obvious. Like, he said, let's get to work on Monday. And then the next thing you know, he's betraying Quinn. That didn't play. I'm like, okay, so they're back home, but they have 2 Arturos. And then having gone from episode 1, where it ends with them having the creaky gate, thinking they're back home, and then dad's alive, I was already holding out some judgment of like, well, we just saw that the creaky gate is not definitive. So let's just see how far it goes. They made me doubt that. They did a good job, I thought, of me early on suspecting like, well, creaky gate doesn't mean they're on our Earth. And they really made me think, okay, maybe this is, maybe Quinn's remembering the Super Bowl wrong. Maybe something else is wrong. Like, you know.
Quick question. Not just did you watch this when it first came out, but were you a fan of the show when it first came out?
Oh yeah, I was a fan of the show from episode 1 back then, for sure.
Because I was also a fan of the show, and it was appointment viewing for me. So I guess you remembered it less astutely.
Oh yeah, no, I barely remember the plot elements of this particular episode.
Oh my god, no, yeah, no, this was like the seminal. And keep in mind, so when I was a kid, second grade, my dad introduced me to Doctor Who on PBS, and it was the first time that these kind of crazy ideas, and of course nobody had heard of them because it was a dork thing, a nerd thing, or whatever. And then Sliders was like, oh my god, these are all the feels that I get from Doctor Who. And then
in fact, I've probably seen this twice because I went back and rewatched the first 3 seasons of Sliders in like 2008. I just have a bad memory, Brian.
I did like the fact that they figured out a clever trick of why good/bad Arturo would know everything, because they were like, what about this? What about that? And then the answer was because Wade
published her diary.
Published everything, and evil Arturo would do it. In my heart, past Brian remembers this as being the starting point of everything getting mushy. Like, if we can't trust if this is good or bad Arturo, do I like this show anymore? And now keep in mind, factual history is at some point I fell off watching, but this could have been fixed with like a definitive episode, I don't know, 4 episodes from now, where it's like, what? That thing? You wouldn't have known that if I had read Wade's biography about it. No, I
can't believe you didn't trust me. Yeah.
And then it's like they would have collapsed that superposition or whatever.
And I always expected that original Arturo would slide somehow into them, right? And it would be, I was the good Arturo. Then he proves it in one of these ways. They think, oh my God, you figured out sliding, you can get us back. And then his timer breaks. But they didn't do that either.
Well, what as a narrative device, I think we can both agree it's similar to that moment where we just watched Battlestar Galactica. In that series, there's a moment that the Pegasus shows up, and you assume, well, this is going to last an episode, maybe 2, but instead for like a season and a half, the Pegasus is around and then eventually gets blowed up. Whatever it is, there's a discomfort that we wanted to see resolved, and Sliders, to my knowledge, never got around to resolving that.
I don't know if they did or not, because I fell off watching both times. Like, I just
really dumb, guys.
Like after the second season, it just kind of fizzles.
Guys, I'm talking to all of our listeners, all of our patrons. This show gets really bad. This show gets really bad.
It's so good in episode 1 and the episode we just watched.
Yeah, no, it gets bad. I guess that's all we're going to talk about going forward, because if we're going to listen to the worst and the last, we're about to crap all over it. But right now, this is the time to eulogize this show, Tom. The first 2 seasons of this show are very, very good.
That is why I think this is a great example of the value of this format, the full experience, because it varies in season 1 and 2. Like, some episodes are certainly better than others, right? I'll steal your phrase. There has to be a worst episode of everything, right? But
at least good episode of everything.
Season, the pilot and this episode, They are shining examples of this show at its best. Second half of the pilot does slow down a little bit, but the first half is so tight. This episode, so tight. And just a great example of how good they could be at storytelling. If anything, the thing you might not catch on to watching just these 2 episodes is how inventive they were in those first 2 seasons with the alternate worlds that they go to, because you don't get to experience the breadth of the different plots that they played with.
They also, what I loved about, since we're eulogizing now, one of the things that I loved about the first 2 seasons is that there was never a morally right or wrong thing. It was just interesting questions. Like, what if women were the dominant gender?
What would happen?
Yeah, exactly. What if it was offensive for a man to run for public office? Or in other ones, they would spend like all of, 90 seconds saying like, did you tell her about the cannibals? And that was as much as they felt like indicating to it. What if penicillin never got invented? What if? That
was actually a fun bit of this that we only got hinted at, I think, in this episode, was you would never pick up from the last episode, right? It wouldn't be most of the time. I think maybe a couple times they did it, but you wouldn't be sliding from the last episode. There would always be other worlds they had visited since the last episode that they would reference. And that would be the like, can you believe those cannibals kind of thing, which is always a fun throwaway too.
Oh man. Can we talk just, fan to fan about how we're feeling going into the next?
I'm curious because I actually never made it to season 5.
I did not either.
Don't think I ever made it to season 4. I might have gotten 1 episode into it in the first run. I have never seen these episodes. I have heard tell of the changes that come. I know what we're about to face, but I've never experienced it.
So I began dating Bonnie, who would later, we celebrated our silver anniversary. I began dating Bonnie around the time I was watching the show. She has watched more of the later episodes than I have. And she was the one who told me to not bother watching them because they were bad.
Yeah. This show started when I was making the least amount of money as an employed person that I've ever made in my life.
First ultimate least was when you were watching.
So those first 3 seasons, I was watching out of, various apartments in Austin while in between working at a bookstore and going to bars. By the time it ended, I was happily cohabitating with Eileen Rivera in San Francisco. So yeah, I definitely changed my life patterns over the course of Sliders, which is one part of why I stopped watching it. But I kept watching Star Trek Voyager during that same period. So
Voyager had its own journey, but was relatively consistent.
I would argue Voyager got better versus the opposite as it went on.
For those of you who are just watching the shows that we're watching without context, please know that the first 2 seasons, I think both Tom and I would agree, were quite good. But then, boy, oh boy, do they drop off and they become weird and something else, and we will not understand them. Buckle up for us to...
I'm actually weirdly excited to just see how weird it is.
Not from what I
in the way when you visit the alternate universe as a slider, it's not that the other universe is better than yours, it's that it's different. I'm kind of looking at it that way. It's an alternate universe of slider material that we'll be watching.
I'm just saying, if you ever want to skip out, the next 2 episodes might be good times to skip out.
Oh no, definitely not. Definitely not. That next episode will be the lowest rated. There's always shouting for it. We're always going to watch the lowest rated. That's not a bad thing. We get to understand and appreciate the good by looking at the bad. And sometimes I don't know if it'll be the case this time. Sometimes the lowest rated is actually a pretty good episode. So you never know.
So far, we've seen that a lot. I don't expect it this time.
We will withhold judgment until we have finished watching the Java Jive. Season 5, episode 8 of Sliders. That is what we will be viewing next time. Brian and I have never seen it before, so we're both going in it with a totally open mind, aren't we, Brian?
Tom, for the last time, let me just say, like, with complete honesty, how much I enjoyed the first 2 seasons of this show. Because I don't think the next 2 weeks I'm going to say very many nice things.
Don't forget, folks, if you are a patron, you can find out what those things that Brian are going to say earlier than other people by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Cordkillers. And we will engage you with the full experience again next time.